we have one more talk before the break, and it's Dr. Louis Provencher, who is the Director of Conservation Ecology for the Nature Conservancy in Nevada. And he's been working there since January of 2002. Before that, he worked in Florida, so he brings a fresh set of eyes to questions here. He does have bachelor's and master's from biology from the University of Quebec in Montreal, and a doctorate in ecology from the University of Tennessee. So his talk is about spatial land use modeling for sagebrush shrubland restoration.
Thank you. I have three other people who are on this talk, Elaine York and Jen Green, who work for the Nature Conservancy of Utah, and Leonardo Frid, who's a contractor. He works for SF Technology up in British Columbia in Vancouver. So the Utah Partners for Conservation and Development have funded this work, and there's a bunch of organization people, and we also got help from several consultants in the range management field, and USU graduate students, and scientists from the Forest Service that helped us with the work that we've been doing. So a little bit of indoctrination here. The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to preserve the plants, animals, and natural communities that represent the diversity of life on Earth by protecting the lands and water they need to survive. It's probably something many of you aspire to. We try to do our best, but this is the reason why we're doing this modeling, is to actually come to that state. So I'm going to start with a problem statement that you should have if you're going to model. And we're talking about a specific area of Utah here. So what we assume and what we observe is that the fire regimes and the vegetation consequently of the Grouse Creek and Raft River Mountain, I'll be showing you a map, may be out of their natural range of variability for various reasons that we all identify today. Species of interest, greater sage grouse is one of them, but it's not the only one. And ranching interests will be harmed by this if it continues in this manner. And the agencies, the state and federal agencies, have put quite a bit of money in doing restoration, whatever that means now, and they want to know if it paid off or not. This is the Grouse Creek, Mountains-Raft River Mountain area. That's Salt Lake right there, and there's a Sawtooth National Forest, there's BLM, and the 50% landscape is privately held. So it's and this is 1.1 million acres. The actual project that the Nature Conservancy is involved in is 1.3 million acres. So the partners, we did this not alone, but we did this with the Utah Partners for Conservation and Development. We had workshops and goals were formulated with them. And they want to know how different strategies can apply on the landscape and whether they can support their management goals. So it does fire, there's herbicide, and all these things that you can just throw at the land. Will that achieve your management goals? And we've been doing things, not we, not me, but people have been doing things this landscape, trying to do restoration projects here and there, and they want to know what have we done in the past year, in the past 5 years? Has that paid off? The Utah Partners for Conservation and Development were created a little bit like 2 years ago. It's a wonderful organization. So they want to know if the money they threw at this landscape paid off or not. And the partners also want to know, is there something else we could do differently compared to the current management and end up in a better place 30, 50, 100 years down the road? So when you get into those kind of questions for large landscape and complex dynamics, you have to do some modeling. And I'm trying not to get into the details of modeling because it's going to bore you. So we asked the partners, how would you measure success? What are the metrics? And we provided some ideas and all that, and I was surprised to see that we were able to boil down to two things. The one thing is departure from the natural range of variability, which is defined as a distribution of structural vegetation class and mean fire return intervals under natural ecological conditions. It's pretty much what you would call pre-settlement conditions. It doesn't need to be pre-settlement. And it includes acceptable human use. There is a formula here that I would like to point at, but ecological departure, it's a dissimilarity index. And for those of you who've worked with land fire, you'll know that's the formula to calculate fire regime condition class. So you actually sum over the different seral classes in the reference condition, and the departure with the uncharacteristic stuff like cheatgrass gives you a measure of 0 to 100% of departure. 0, you're at pre-settlement condition, 100% you're completely departed, which would be fire regime condition class 2. So that's how it's very simply calculated. If you want a landscape metric of ecological integrity, that's an easy one right there. The other things that the partners wanted was something that measures how much vegetation complexity, structural complexity you have in any one area. And the people who were proposing that came mostly from the wildlife background, but if you're going to put restoration treatments and you want to favor mule deer or sagebrush or something like that, you would want different successional phases crammed into the same area. So that's a metric they were interested in. And the patch richness index from FragStat, for example, would give you one that. By no means I've never used FragStat, so that's what other people do now. The definition, this is going to be the potential vegetation type. You can equate this with ecological site, but a little larger scale than ecological sites. Landfire calls it biophysical settings. They tried to use the most boring, neutral term possible so they wouldn't get litigated. It's as simple as that. But basically, potential natural vegetation type is the same thing. And it's what you would expect. Communities that are found landscape and processes that shape them, and they persist for a certain amount of time. They're recognizable. Wyoming sagebrush, low sagebrush, mountain sagebrush, that kind of stuff. This is the overall approach, and I'm going to break it down. But this is a slide I also use to explain how you measure fire regime condition class. The same principle, it's just different. So we start with the soil survey from the NRCS. We take the ecological sites, we interpret them, and we lump everything that has a similar upper layer life forms, like all the low sagebrush get lumped together, and all the black sagebrush, and mountain sagebrush, we may split some sites and all that. And then we create a map of what we call biophysical settings, which is what we think is closest to the pre-settlement vegetation type, fixed polygons on the ground there. So your aspen is there, and this and that stuff is there, and all that. We acquire remote sensing imagery that we interpret, and at the same time, once we've done the soil survey and we interpret it, we know how many different distinct ecological systems are found in this landscape, and we would create a state and transition model with the Vegetation Dynamics Development Tool software. You just create your state and transition model. It's very easy to do. And the partners, we did this with the partners. So this workshops with practitioners and scientists and managers, everyone was involved. And then we take the remote sensing imagery. This happens to be another landscape, and this is Iconos imagery, and for each pixel is interpreted in that map that's more colorful to each one of the boxes. So we actually created a model, a state transition model, and we say to the remote sensing specialist, go find those boxes in the landscape. We upload the models and the imagery into this software we call CALSA, Tools for Exploratory Landscape Scenario Analysis, and we formulate management scenarios, and we run this for 100 years, 30 years, whatever. We do replicates. It's a stochastic environment. You do different scenarios and spit out results, and you compare graphs. That's the methodology. It's fairly straightforward, but it's not easy to do. So we create 17 state and transition models. These are quantitative models with parameters and everything with the partners. And it's your usual culprits for the Great Basin, black sagebrush. We split the mountain sagebrush in upland and mountainside. Basin wild rye, sterile aspen, stable aspen, greasewood, salt desert shrub, pinyon juniper. We split the Wyoming and semi-desert and upland site, low sagebrush, curleaf mountain mahogany, wet meadows, mixed conifers, riparian, and some of these rare alpine, subalpine grassland systems that are tiny in this landscape, so they're hard to detect. Here's how you do the state and transition model. So this is the called VDDT software. It's now the interagency software for land fire and for modeling fire regime condition class. If I could show you this if I didn't have this, if this thing would cooperate. But basically, these are successions. This is the age in a box, and everything in blue that goes sideways is a disturbance. So basically, you go from early sterile to late sterile. Actually, this is late sterile, and here there's a certain level of tree establishment. You can have a little bit in the upland site in a natural condition. And this model came from Landfire, given to us for free. It's available, all parameterized and everything. But this is one state. This is the perennial grass state. This is different phases in one state if you use the state and transition jargon in the literature. The other stuff are different states with different levels of cheatgrass, shrub with an annual grassland understory, annual grassland, tree with annual grass underneath, and seeded state. So the partners built these models. And this is just the only example I can give you. We have 17 of these models, all with parameters for flooding, fire, insect outbreaks, the whole 9 yards, and description of cover values for each one of these boxes. Here are the unique cover types. So imagine you have 17 models 10 boxes each. That's 170 potential different boxes. We made an incredible effort to simplify everything to just these ones. So this is the unique cover types for all the models. We made it as generic as possible. You need to do that. Same thing for the natural transitions, anything that's not controlled by management, like even cheatgrass invasion is one of those. This is the full set of disturbances in the landscape. 17 models and we only had this. So we made a great effort to simplify. Same thing for the management transitions. Some of these names are, we're not doing actually restoration annual grasslands. We're taking annual grassland and converting it into something else. So just the names are kind of misleading. But the point of the slide is that keep your models as simple as possible, because then you can interpret them and you take too much time to simulate. Here are the scenarios, and this is a little bit involved to explain. There's 12 things the partners want. They're not equally all important. First, we want to know, we have these non-spatial models, the same transition model, that give us the natural range of variability. One of their outputs is that they tell us how much percent of the landscape was in early sterile phase for Wyoming sagebrush, how it was in mid-sterile and all that. So it gives you the natural range of variability and a value for each one, a quantitative value, 10%, 5, 15. We want to know, if we throw that into a spatial model where the fire spreads and all that, because another one's not spatial, does that change the natural range of variability? That's the first one. Second one is that the partners want to know, well, what we've done for the last 5 years, have we changed the natural range of variability? Have we improved, reduced the departure basically from the natural range of variability? So that's scenario number 2. Then we went to the future landscapes, things you simulate for 30, 100 years. One of them is that we'll take our budgets and we will or will not ignore political boundaries. Forest Service, BLM, private, we don't care. Or we do care and we separate the budgets. One is that we will restore ecological system according to their restorability. If something is doomed and it's too hard or it's a pain in the neck, forget it, we're not doing it. If something is easy to do, that's where we go first. Or the options that we don't care, we do it randomly. So that's number 4. Number 5 is that every road out there, paved or dirt road, will have a fuel break to stop cheatgrass fires. Shane Green from NRCS just got really excited about that one. And if you put, number 6 is if you put a treatment on the ground, it has to be adjacent to a desirable vegetation type. Don't spread it like a postage stamp. Concentrate your efforts. 7, 8, and 9 are sensitivity analysis on 3 to 6. There's some parameters we were not sure about, the dispersal of cheatgrass, knapweeds, and then the level of excessive herbivory. We're not sure about the parameters, and we're treating it as a sensitivity analysis of the management scenario. That's what we're doing here. So they're part of actually 3 to 6. We're just capturing them randomly through variation. And we just do statistics on it to extract the information. A note, so people don't panic, excessive herbivory. We assume in this landscape that the grazing followed best management practice and it did not change states. There are a few cases where we suspect there may be excessive grazing, and as a consequence we have that, but it's a minor component of simulations, and that's what the partners wanted. So we said, fine. The other ones are scenarios where you deliberately put adjacent to another successional phases that are different, early, mid. You never put mid-successional by a mid-successional one. You put an early or late, so you maximize wildlife habitat. There's 3 items that cost a whole lot in the budgets. 3 of those is archaeological survey, native seed, mechanical operations. We did scenarios where we purposefully used the budget values that came from the private industry as opposed to the public sector. Big difference in cost in those 3 items, so that's the other scenario. And the savings went back into restoration. So we're still doing these simulations. What you have to realize is a scenario is a group of management actions. So prescribed burning, herbicide, and all that. Depending on the amount of each action, you get a scenario, and you call it something else. To do that, you need a cost per acre, and you need a total area treated for each action. This is information that is incredibly hard to get. It's amazing how difficult it is to extract this. So we create a public lands budget and a private lands budget, and you have an example here where you treat annual grasslands. And here's on public lands, on this landscape of 1.1 million acre, approximately 650 acres are treated. The cost per acre is $139 per acre. On private lands, no one bothers doing this. And the cost is $52 an acre. So that's an example of one action in a scenario. For doing these things, we included temporal variability. We took the total area burned in this landscape, and we mapped it out here. This is actually true data. And we extracted the statistical properties out of this. and we recreated time series distribution that reflect that series, the original series, for the purpose of the simulation, because we're simulating for 100 years here. Or it doesn't matter, we're simulating for a time period that's different than the actual data. So we have to recreate a time series that has the same statistical properties. So this is out of the software, the Tesla software, just that. That's why the imagery is not too great. Similarly, when you're doing spatial modeling, you have to define spatial distribution. This is a pain to get. It is. So what we have here is this is a log scale on hectares, powers of 10, and these are the class distribution for disturbances. And we have here on the side is the percentage, these bars. This again is out of the Tesla software. But things like non-native species, PG encroachment, non-native herbivory, mostly it's small-scale disturbances. The fire distribution actually came out of Jeff Klein's data that he gave us from the BLM, so we took that out of there. Excessive herbivory, we just put it in the middle. When we didn't have any information, we're trying to be careful. And flooding events, water and insect disease, we kind of distributed in this way from data that we used from elsewhere. Not perfect, a lot of guessing and all that, but hey, it's modeling. I was going to elaborate on this, and it's too much data, and I'm just going to skip it. Just tell you is that for restorations to the scenario where we said some biophysical settings out there, vegetation types, will have higher priority for restoration than others because they're more manageable. There's higher success. And this is just rates, and there's 3 criteria depending on whether you need to use native seeding, whether you need to not seed and you don't want cheatgrass, or whether you have a danger of getting, the knapweeds and the purple loosestrife of the world, and you really hit the system every time possible. So this will be explained in a report at the end of October, hopefully. So some basic results. We're still running simulations. One replicator, one simulation, 30 years, runs for 3 days nonstop on a computer, and it hogs up 99% of the processor, so it takes time to run these things. But we're going to talk about remote sensing, comparison of A-spatial and spatial reference conditions. We did actually get 5-year cumulative impact is mostly done, and then a little bit of stuff I'm going to show you in the scenarios, but I can't show you too much because it's still in progress. So for the remote sensing, spatial solutions, that's Jeff Campbell out of Bend, Oregon, did the remote sensing analysis, and I helped him in the field, but he's the guy who does this. We captured imagery from June 13, 2006 to do this. Then he conducted what we call I love the expression cluster busting analysis, find that great, and unsupervised classification, basically. We use the NRCS soil survey as a base layer. We interpreted, massaging and all that. And then he got that, and then he identified the different states in the boxes of the model. You have these boxes, state transition model. I asked him, go look for those boxes. Then we went out in the field, he and I, and we had a field trip with the partners involved on a few of the plots, and we did 87 plots. And these are training plots for the remote sensing imagery. And then we did cover values. It was ocular estimates. This is quick and dirty. So he started the work. Imagine this: 1.1 million acre starts on May 15, and by July 20th, the work was all done, wrapped up, and we had our deliverable. This is really fast work, low budget. So then he created a map of biophysical settings and of current condition, which is the state and transition class. And he did that also with hundreds of drive-by notes. When you're riding in these trucks with the antenna on the top, you can actually put notes on the imagery while you're driving by with the Imagine software. And it was just amazing, but that's his job, it's not mine. I just go, ooh, So here's the biophysical map. This is what we think is not close, but given the speed at which we did this and the resolution we have, this is what we think it kind of looked like during pre-settlement in terms of vegetation types. Some things I have to catch up the NRCS. We find some vegetation that NRCS said it's that vegetation there. We went there and it was not that. So Shane, actually Green, warned us, you're going to find those things, that's just normal. And there are the vegetation types. Some were so small that, like the mountain grasslands, it's just impossible to detect practically, especially at 30-meter resolution. And here are the cells, the boxes. So each one of these colors, so you have early, mid, open, late, close. Each pixel, so I think the resolution we went down is 25 meters with this. Each pixel is corresponds to one of those boxes in the state and transition model. So it's getting to be pretty sophisticated analysis at this point here. And this is the stuff we then took and then shoved into Kelso after doing a lot of massaging with it and all that, because you have to overlay management layers and priority zones and all your scenarios and all that, and then you run that. But you absolutely need this information to do the simulations. Otherwise, otherwise you would have to ask a very different question. So, the other thing I was really interested in is comparing the non-spatial and the spatial results in terms of the natural range of variability, what you would expect at pre-settlement in terms of seral classes. I use the word seral, knowing that it's a poo-poo word, and it's called succession and all that, but it's an old habit and all that, so I hope you all understand that I may be outdated in my jargon. So this is going to be a bit complicated, and it really is bad I don't have a pointer, but what you have here is that you have the purple arrows, which is the average. Let me backtrack. At the bottom of the graph, it has succession class, the A to E, that's the landfire codes. It goes from early to late seral, young to old. Not every model has a class, but the proportions that you see there are what you would expect. So if I take the first one up there, it's approximately 11%. The first box on stable aspen, 11% is more or less, we expected 11% of the landscape of aspen to be in early seral phase during pre-settlement. This is what it means. So, and it was 45% in mid-successional phase and blah, blah, blah. So the purple star is the average from the state and transition model that were non-spatial. And what you see here is a box plot with the median, the 25, 75, and the max and min. And basically, for stable aspen, seral aspen, the match is pretty darn good. Pinyon juniper woodland, we predict spatially less old growth, class D. Same thing for curleaf mountain mahogany, a whole lot less. So something about older vegetation type, sensitive, surrounded by something like mountain sagebrush that burns more often, just cleans up a lot of this old stuff. That's what it means. Low sagebrush, the same thing. Mountain sagebrush fire going into low sagebrush and all that. Black sagebrush did very well. I'm just running down. All these graphs are similar. Basin wall rye, this is the loamy bottom site. Fine and dandy. Wyoming sagebrush, right on. Mountain subalpine grassland, which is a tiny system, a lot of variability associated. One fire goes through that and you wreck the whole system. That's where some variability is picked up. But mountain big sagebrush, the upland sites and mountain sites did very well and all that. No problem there. So basically there's a good match between these two, the spatial and non-spatial, except for what people call the older seral stage and fire sensitive system. Salt desert shrub, greasewood, right on. Just perfectly on. And the riparian system, we predict less of this older vegetation. We predict more of the older cottonwood type of vegetation than you would have normally. So these are actually, in itself, these are really, for me, really interesting results. This is actually neat. Here is, we ran these simulations for 1,000 years for the pre-settlement. Well, I say the pre-settlement, the natural, the reference condition, whatever you want to call it. I'm not so hung up on the terms here. Everything that was younger than 500 years we just threw away because there's transient dynamics. Here is 500 years, and we ran it for 1,000 years, virtual years. And you see two maps here, and just look at the colors. It's amazing how much the successional phases just jump all over the landscape. We print every 50 years. It jumps all over the place. But however, when you calculate the percentages in the landscape, 5 minutes? Thank you, sir. They don't change that much. So it's actually very interesting. 5 years the last 5 years. So what we did is that we took for the natural range of variability, we took Jeff Campbell's map and we compared the two. Then we subtracted all the treatment projects that had been done by the partners. The partners gave us some information. We backtracked to what it was 5 years ago. We compared them. So the question is, did we do anything? And the answer is no, we didn't do anything. Because what you notice is that the two columns have very similar numbers. So in most cases, actually, the situation got worse because now we had more cheatgrass than we had before. So the few projects, or the projects that were done there, did not change the departure from the natural range of variability of that thing. So I'm sorry, guys, depressing message, but that's reality. Then we did this for the spatial. So we use a spatial natural range of variability. The same calculation, and it's actually a little bit worse, because the vegetation is even more departed in the spatial reference condition than it is from the non-spatial one. So, not great. Maps here, I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to blast. This is portion of the landscape. Initial condition, undesirable type, everything cheatgrass, stuff you don't like and all that. And then no management. So it got back, I'm backtracking, so it got more black here, got worse. And here the same thing where we had money distributed regardless of ownership. And you notice what we're making holes in the black stuff. There's a little bit less. And in here we only treated BLM land, and you suddenly see these yellow spots that are opening, so the BLM land is opening when you actually put the money there. And this is on real estate budgets. So this is just we're going to have gazillions of maps of scenario stuff, and I don't have them to show you yet, but their computer's running. So the conclusion is that, this is what I retain of this, and I didn't reflect it too much in the talk, is that for me, it's the social process that we went through to build these models and come to this objective setting and statement of problems and people working together is actually what's more valuable to me as a modeler than the actual modeling. So, because once you have that engagement, endorsement of your partners, they understand, they trust what you're doing, then you can move forward with restoration. If you don't have that, you're just not going anywhere. So, the models have to be practical, simple, real budgets, include variability in it. Spatial effects, as we notice, are greater for stuff that has longer fire turn intervals, and you'll get less what we call old growth. So just expect that. In the last 5 years, I'm sorry, but we didn't improve the landscape too much with the restoration project we've done. We're going to get a finer analysis. That analysis is not completed, so hopefully it'll get better. And stay posted for the rest. Okay, thank you.